So, to unpack how vicarious trauma may relate to the issue on boundaries, it leads to the question on how the professional views themselves within the interaction with a client or student. And I think this model is quite an interesting illustration of that. Um, it is conceived by Stephen Cartman, and the drama triangle is a social model of human interaction. The triangle maps a type of destructive interaction that can occur between people in conflict. The drama triangle model is a tool often used in psychotherapy, specifically in transactional analysis. And the triangle of actors in the drama is oppressors, victims, and rescuers. Within clinical settings, the model is commonly referred to as the treatment triangle, and the knowledge of the treatment triangle assists practitioners to identify transference in their professional relationship with clients and highlight potential boundary crossings, which are quite relevant. It is equally relevant, I feel, amongst other helping professionals too. So, teachers, for example, where boundaries can sometimes be blurred in supporting those they serve. The treatment triangle invites reflection, when working with clients with complex needs, and a greater awareness of the potential impact of trauma work on oneself. And to show how it might be observed in a practical setting, a common presentation with working with perhaps young survivors of war trauma might be teachers who view themselves as rescuers. Yeah. So the rescuing teacher views the student as as a helpless victim. There is over involvement. A teacher goes overboard to support their student with good intentions, and perhaps because of trauma, the teacher responds to lack of progress or continued misbehavior by either blaming the student or disengaging and then becoming the persecutor. The teacher then feels guilty about persecutor behavior and then starts the cycle again. Another example could be a teacher views the student as a helpless victim, there's over involvement, student responds by becoming increasingly needy and requests based around lack of boundaries set by the teacher. The teacher then responds angrily. Teacher is uncomfortable about being seen as a bad person or reacting that way. Then the teacher then meets the original, perhaps unreasonable request by the student and then repeats the cycle. An example I like to give in the context of community development and resettlement, or perhaps in the way that our communities might find newly resettled refugee communities arriving in Australia, may be, a well-meaning local community embraces helpless victims from Syria, Iraq, Congo, Bhutan, elsewhere. Community presents support without empowering new arrivals. Due to trauma, which is often what we can see, issues arise resulting in perceptions community members are not grateful for the support given. Community sentiments becomes angry towards refugees. Yeah. So this is also part of this cycle. Effective practice requires us to step outside the cycle of the triangle, and supervision can be particularly helpful for this. A space to debrief. Taking a bird's eye view encourages awareness and invites self responsibility for our actions and attitudes. For example, identifying one's propensity for rescuing, and a lot of us might have that propensity, recognizing personal secondary gains, and also questioning whether one has become over or under involved with client issues. Recognizing the personal impact of working with traumatized clients is a starting point for addressing the experience of victimhood. A sense of personal power can be realized through a greater focus on work practices within our control, attempts at advocacy within organizational boundaries, reminding ourselves of the reason for doing this work, involvement in staff support activities through self care measures such as work life balance, and connection to colleagues and communities. So, within this cycle, we can see that the proper way to work with a client would be around empowering, problem solving with the client, and also setting clear boundaries, as what we previously described. So, this slide is again showing issues pertaining to over involvement and avoidance along a continuum. So, showing how practitioners and teachers can often resort to trying to do everything for their students, and this can quickly change to complete disengagement or avoidance as a result of the perceived negative reactions to the support they have provided. So, on the over involvement continuum, there might be so the crusader approach, doing it all oneself, excessive responsibility for people's feelings, excessive accommodation of people's difficulties, and boundary violations. And on the under involvement, perhaps as a result of the cycle which I described earlier, can be issues pertaining to a preoccupation with efficiency, cynicism, rigid boundaries, having no responsibility for people's reactions, and no considerations for people's circumstances as well. So, with this in mind, we need to be working within the ideal range. So, maintaining empathy whilst also maintaining flexible boundaries and a sense of professional detachment. I think it is important to acknowledge that there will obviously be times when we need to go over and above in our support for those we work with, particularly in low resource areas, sometimes in rural and regional areas where there just aren't any other options. I think the important thing to reflect upon, however, is the attitude in which we work with survivors and the way we see ourselves as the practitioner within this continuum and similarly in the cycle within what we talked about previously. This necessitates a need to empower and problem solve with our clients and not to see ourselves as rescuers.